When was the last time you were truly alone with yourself and felt afraid of what might answer back? There is a quiet weight that settles in when the noise fades, not the silence of an empty room, but the deeper one that arrives when notifications stop, conversations end, and the day finally loosens its grip. In that space, something stirs. Thoughts you postponed, feelings you labeled as later, a sense that you are living slightly beside your own life, close enough to recognize it, distant enough to avoid touching it. You may know this feeling well. It often appears at night or in moments that should feel peaceful but don't. We are told we live in the most connected era in history, yet many of us carry an unnamed loneliness that no message seems to reach. The modern world is efficient at keeping us occupied, but strangely indifferent to whether we feel whole. We scroll, we consume, we optimize ourselves, hoping clarity will emerge from speed. But speed rarely brings understanding. It only delays the encounter. And so we keep moving, not because we are certain of where we're going, but because stopping feels dangerous. There is a paradox here. We crave meaning, yet we fear the stillness required to sense it. We want depth, but we skim our own lives. Somewhere inside, you might feel this tension, the desire to live more honestly, and the simultaneous urge to stay comfortably numb. It's not hypocrisy, it's human. Even thinkers like Kierkegaard whispered about this unease, the quiet anxiety of realizing that freedom is both a gift and a burden. To be free is to be responsible for listening to yourself, and that is no small task. Perhaps you've noticed how often distraction masquerades as a relief. A busy calendar, a constant soundtrack, a screen glowing late into the night. These things soothe us temporarily, but they also keep us from hearing the deeper questions forming underneath. Questions about who we are when no one is watching, about whether the life we're building actually belongs to us, about why success sometimes feels hollow and rest feels undeserved. There is also another contradiction we rarely admit. We want to be seen, but not fully known. To be known would require exposure, and exposure invites uncertainty. Camus once lingered on the idea that the world does not offer ready-made meaning. That realization can feel terrifying or strangely liberating. If meaning is not handed to us, then perhaps it is something we shape, slowly, imperfectly, through attention and courage. You might recognize this moment, the one where everything looks fine from the outside, yet something inside feels unresolved. Not broken, just unanswered. That quiet discomfort doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It may mean you are paying attention. It may mean you're closer to yourself than you think, standing at the edge of an honest conversation you've postponed for years. And so we arrive here, together, not with solutions, but with presence, with the understanding that confusion can be a form of intelligence and doubt a sign of care. You don't need to resolve your life tonight. You don't need to define yourself perfectly, but perhaps you can allow the silence to exist without immediately filling it. Perhaps you can stay a little longer with the question instead of rushing toward an answer. After all, if you stopped running from your own inner voice, what do you think it would ask of you now? If this reflection resonated with you, if it felt like someone put words to something you've carried quietly, consider staying here a little longer. Subscribe, like, or simply return when you need a space that doesn't rush you. Sometimes the most meaningful conversations are the ones we choose to continue. There is a moment Friedrich Nietzsche described with unsettling clarity, the moment when familiar values lose their weight and the world feels strangely hollow, as if the meanings we relied on have quietly withdrawn.
He did not present this as a dramatic collapse, but as a slow, almost imperceptible erosion, one that happens inside ordinary lives. You wake up, fulfill your roles, meet expectations, and yet something feels thinner than it should. Not tragic, just empty in a way that's hard to explain. Many of us live precisely in this space, outwardly functional, inwardly suspended. The modern world rewards performance, consistency, productivity. It does not ask whether your inner life is aligned with the rhythm you're forced to keep. And so you adapt. You become efficient at surviving days that don't quite belong to you. Over time, this adaptation can feel like maturity, when in fact it may be a quiet resignation. Nietzsche warned about this kind of life, not as a moral failure, but as a human risk. When meaning is inherited rather than examined, it eventually collapses under its own weight. What replaces it is not chaos, but numbness, a subtle fatigue of the soul. You might recognize it in yourself, the way joy feels muted, the way goals lose their flavor once achieved, the way rest no longer restores. It's not despair in the theatrical sense. It's flatter than that, more polite, more dangerous. There is an emotional paradox here. You want stability, yet you sense that something essential has been sacrificed for it. You crave certainty, but certainty has made you feel strangely distant from yourself. Nietzsche spoke of the courage required to face this inner void, not to fill it immediately, but to endure it long enough for something honest to emerge. That endurance is rarely celebrated. It looks like doubt, it feels like disorientation, but it may be the beginning of a more authentic relationship with your own life. Perhaps you feel this tension without naming it, a vague dissatisfaction that surfaces in quiet moments, a sense that you are living according to scripts written by necessity, culture, or fear rather than conviction. If so, you are not broken. You may simply be standing at the threshold Nietzsche pointed towards, the uncomfortable space where borrowed meanings fall away and personal responsibility begins. This is not a call to radical transformation or heroic reinvention. It is more subtle than that. It is an invitation to notice where your life feels lived on autopilot and where it still resists being fully explained. Because before meaning can be rebuilt, it must first be felt as missing. And perhaps the real question is not how to escape that emptiness, but whether you're willing to listen to what it reveals when you finally stop looking away. As that emptiness settles, another voice quietly enters the conversation, one that does not rush to repair what feels fractured. Martin Heidegger spoke of everydayness, the way we become absorbed in routines, roles, and expectations until existence itself feels automatic, not false, just unexamined. Life continues, but it no longer feels fully owned. Days blur, not because nothing happens, but because everything happens without touching something essential inside you. This absorption is not a personal failure. It is almost the default condition of modern life. We are trained to respond, to perform, to remain available. Silence becomes suspicious. Stillness feels unproductive. And yet Heidegger suggested that it is precisely in moments of disruption, unease, anxiety without a clear object, that existence reveals itself more honestly, not as comfort, but as truth. That subtle anxiety you feel when everything is technically fine may not be something to eliminate. It may be something trying to speak. There is a strange contradiction here. The more the world offers explanations, diagnoses, labels, the harder it becomes to sit with what cannot be neatly named. You might sense a quiet pressure to define yourself quickly, your purpose, your identity, your path, so the discomfort will pass. But rushing toward definition can be another form of escape. Heidegger warned that when we flee too quickly from this inner tension, we return to the familiar not because it is true, but because it is safe. Perhaps you've noticed how rare it is to encounter someone who is genuinely present with their own uncertainty. We admire confidence, decisiveness, clarity. We rarely honor the courage it takes to remain open, unfinished, unsure. Yet this openness may be where something real begins. Not answers, but orientation. Not certainty, but honesty. To feel lost without immediately demanding a map. Maybe this is where you find yourself now. Not in crisis, not in despair, but in a quieter, more unsettling place. A place where the old explanations no longer satisfy, and the new ones have not yet arrived. If so, there's nothing wrong with you. You may simply be experiencing what